Please close your eyes. Do not merely listen to these words with your physical ears, or receive them with the bare, hasty intellect of a modern observer. Let your soul truly step into another dimension, drifting along the surging, reversing currents of time. Right now, I want you to shed all the noise and bustle of the 21st century. Let the artificial light of digital screens, the blaring horns on the avenues, and all the invisible pressures and cluttered worries of daily life recede deep into the darkness. Instead, let all your deepest senses be awakened. Reach out and touch a place buried under the thick dust of more than 2,000 years of history. We are about to enter together one of the most silent, most fierce, most somber, and most fateful moments in the entire existence of the universe. Let the darkness envelop your mind. Unlike the brilliant sunset on the peak of the Mount of Olives that we once witnessed, the space surrounding you now is a thick, heavy darkness, cold to the bone. This is not the gentle, quiet dark of a moonlit night or a peaceful sleep in a cozy room. It is a darkness that carries the breath of the realm of death, a tangible darkness so stifling that you feel as if it is tightening around your lungs, suffocating every weak breath. Your sense of smell no longer receives the sacred, fragrant scent of frankincense wafting from the most holy place, nor the warmth of bread baked in haste for the Passover. Striking your nostrils now is a cruel mixture of the scents of agony. Can you smell it? It is the musty, foul smell of damp earth that has remained for centuries without once seeing the sun. It is the smell of mold and moss growing wild on the cold limestone walls. It is the sour, panicked sweat of death row prisoners who were once held here awaiting execution. And if you are sensitive enough to tear through that gloomy mist, you will smell the pungent tang of fresh blood just seeping from wounds that haven't had time to scab, dripping thick drops onto the rough, steel floor. The silence of the night here does not bring peace. It is torn by sharp, cold sounds that make your skin crawl. Throughout the space echoes the sound of water dripping steadily from the jagged ceiling like the indifferent ticking of a countdown clock signaling death. Above your head, through thick geological layers, is the thumping, brutal footsteps of the temple guards, their hobnailed boots pacing on night watch. But most haunting, most heartbreaking, and most cruel is the cold clinking of large rusted iron chains constantly clashing, rubbing, and cutting deep into the flesh every time the only prisoner in this cellar moves out of exhaustion. Welcome to the longest, loneliest, and darkest night in all of human history. Midnight turning into the dawn of the Great Holy Friday. The place where you stand is no ordinary location. You are at the very bottom of the abyss beneath the sacred Mount Zion in Jerusalem, located deep beneath the solid foundations of the magnificent mansion belonging to the High Priest Caiaphas. Above the ground, just dozens of meters of limestone away, is a world of religious power, of luxury, of beeswax candles shining bright to warm insidious political schemes. A place where men in silk robes sip wine and decide the lives of others. But in this deep, silent bottom, there is only a mute, deathly black hole. Bring the gaze of your soul into that ghostly dark corner. Look at the man in chains, stripped of all dignity and freedom. It is the greatest, most tragic paradox of existence. He who is the radiant light of the world, he who used the sovereign word to create the shining galaxies and dispel the chaos of the universe at the beginning of time. He who boldly declared to the crowds, "I am the light of life. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness." Now he himself is being imprisoned, suffocated in the deepest, most cruel darkness of human injustice and base betrayal. The man slumped on that freezing stone floor, his body frail and crisscrossed with lash marks, is Jesus. How did the eternal light fall into this fierce abyss? To understand this ultimate torment, we must turn the wheel of time back a few hours to witness an unprecedented journey of agony that humanity inflicted upon its creator. The story begins upon leaving the secluded Garden of Gethsemane. After a spiritual battle so terrible that blood vessels burst and sweat turned into great drops of blood falling to the ground. After the fateful, treacherous kiss of Judas, who used the very symbol of love as a signal for slaughter. The armed, murderous mob of the temple rushed in. They did not arrest him with the minimum respect due to a moral master. In a bloodlust and the blindness of hatred, they charged, tying his arms behind his back with rough ropes. They shackled him like a most dangerous major criminal of the empire. Brutal hands grabbed his cloak, dragging the Savior through the night. They dragged him across the dark Kidron Valley. You must remember the setting was the night of the Passover. The stream at the bottom of the Kidron Valley at this time was not a clear, gently rippling brook. It was deep red, thick with the blood of hundreds of thousands of innocent lambs just slaughtered by the priests at the temple, drained through the discharge channels. As he waded through that filthy and pungent stream, the hem of the robe and the bare feet of Christ were soaked in the blood of lambs. A tragically epic prophetic image that shakes the very foundations of eternity. The true Lamb of God, the holy and blemishless one who is about to bear all the filthy sins of the world. Walking amidst the blood of the old covenant to trudge toward the sacrificial altar of a new eternal covenant. The blood of the old covenant flowed down into the deep valley, while the blood of the new covenant was about to be raised high on a desolate hill. From the bottom of that cold valley, full of the aura of death, the escorting mob began to drag him up the steep eastern slope of Mount Zion. The destination of this brutal night escort was the back entrance of the luxurious mansion of Caiaphas, the leader who held the highest religious and political power of the Jewish people at the time. Near the boundary beside the church, archaeologists have excavated and preserved a system of ancient limestone steps. These steps are rough, jagged, steep, and worn by the harshness of time. Every reputable historian and archaeologist in the world agrees 100% that this was the sole unique path leading from the valley floor to the High Priest's palace. In the 1st century, there was no other way. In the thick darkness of that night, under the flickering, threatening light of torches, the bare feet of Jesus, the feet that brought the good news of peace and traveled throughout Galilee to heal the sick, were forced to walk. Or rather, he was shoved and dragged savagely on these very heartless stone steps. Close your eyes and use your full imagination to picture that horrific scene. His hands were tied behind his back with tightening knots, causing him to lose all ability to balance. With every stumbling step on the jagged rock, his knees bled, and his face struck the sharp edges of the limestone. Every time he collapsed from ultimate exhaustion from the weight of the spiritual battle in the garden, the sharp spears of the soldiers heartlessly prodded his sides. Brutal kicks landed without mercy, accompanied by countless curses, insults, and the vilest slurs. New wounds overlapped old ones. The drops of blood sweat, not yet dry now, mingled with fresh blood from torn flesh, dripping onto the cold limestone steps, leaving blood-stained marks of redeeming love on the path of suffering. On that steep path of tears and blood, he was completely alone. The 11 closest disciples who had once proudly boasted they would die to protect him were now like a flock of lost sheep, panicking and fleeing into the night. They left their beloved master to face the cruel wrath of the world alone. The great loneliness began to tighten around his soul when dragged through the heavy wooden gates. Jesus entered the midst of one of the most shameful, irrational, and base trials ever recorded in the judicial history of mankind. The Jewish law of that time was built on an extremely strict, humane, and just system, designed by the most brilliant scholars to provide maximum protection for the accused. The law strictly forbade holding a trial for a capital offense at night. It strictly forbade sentencing a person to death on the same day as the trial, requiring a night to pass, so the judges could reflect carefully to avoid wrongful verdicts based on impulsive emotions. And specifically, it was never permitted to open a court during the preparation days for the nation's major feasts. Yet in this luxurious mansion, glowing with candlelight and filled with the scent of incense because of power envy reaching its peak because of the fear of losing influence over the crowds, the religious elite heartlessly tore, trampled, and completely ignored every foundation of the laws set by themselves and their ancestors. A secretive, hasty trial full of the stench of a dirty setup took place in the middle of the night. The High Religious Council continuously called in false witnesses, men who had been bribed with silver in the dead of night to utter poisonous slanders to convict him to death. But ridiculously and ironically, even the testimonies of those liars were completely inconsistent, contradictory, and self-refuting, unable to form a logical indictment. Deceit always has its clumsy loopholes, standing among that pack of hungry wolves baring their teeth, standing before the insidious accusations poured out like the venom of vipers. What did the Creator do? He did not become angry. He did not call down a legion of angels to incinerate that sham court, nor did he speak to defend his innocence. He chose silence, a silence so great, majestic, deep, and sharp that it made those sitting on arrogant judges' chairs tremble, panic, and go mad. The silence of Jesus was not the weakness of a criminal losing an argument. That silence was the absolute authority of the Son of God, the ultimate patience, enduring all shame to fulfill the verdict of salvation. That silence was the perfect fulfillment down to every breath of the prophecy Isaiah had shouted 700 years prior. A prophecy echoing from eternity that he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is sent so. He opened not his mouth. When they could not break the majestic silence of truth with cheap lies, the High Priest Caiaphas became so angry he lost all control. The pride of power was challenged to the extreme. He stood up abruptly, stepped away from his seat, and heartlessly tore his own expensive robe, screaming to convict him as a blasphemer of God. According to ancient Mosaic law, the high priest was never allowed to tear his sacred robe under any circumstances, as it was the symbol of the wholeness of the office, connecting heaven and earth. That frantic and unconscious act by Caiaphas, seen through a deep theological lens, was the symbolic end of the corrupt earthly priesthood. By tearing the garment, Caiaphas stripped away the authority of the old religious system to officially make way for the eternal, perfect, and unique high priest forever, Jesus Christ himself. The death sentence was pronounced in haste amidst blind agreement and malicious cheering. Immediately, the hypocritical mask of the elders and the learned scribes fell, exposing the raw animal instinct within man. They no longer maintained any dignity or civility. They rushed in spitting foul saliva of hatred on his wholly innocent face. He who used the living water to wash the human soul now had to endure the filthiest thing from the human mouth. They used a piece of rough, dirty cloth to blindfold him. Then, using hands wearing jeweled rings, they delivered brutal, stinging punches to his cheeks. They shouted in mockery, challenging him in base glee, "Prophesy, O Savior, who is it that struck you?" The one who is truth was judged by those immersed in lies. The one who is life was trampled by those who crave death. The all-knowing one who understands every thought allowed blind men to cover his eyes. But all the flesh-tearing physical pain from the punches, the humiliation from the spit, perhaps those did not compare. They could not match the fatal blow piercing his heart from another space just outside the courtyard. Right as the shameful and violent trial was occurring in the cold courtyard below, the familiar voice of Peter rang out, the proud lead disciple, the solid rock of the future church, the one who just hours ago had drawn a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant to protect him, the one who had boldly declared that even if everyone deserted the master, he was ready to risk his life for him. Yet right now, as he stood warming his hands by the enemy's fire, he repeatedly uttered oaths to deny him. Not once, but 3 consecutive times out of cowardice and the surrounding fear of death. Peter swore and cursed that he did not know the wretched man being tried inside. The denial was sharp, severing all bonds of affection. Just as the third denial left Peter's lips, a rooster crowed, shrilly piercing the cold night. A jarring sound signaling that the betrayal was complete. At that moment, the Bible records a cinematic detail that has broken the hearts of every generation. Jesus turned his face. Through the aggressive crowd, insulting him through the cold space, his swollen, bloody, and spit-stained eyes glided across the void, meeting Peter's horrified gaze directly. Try to pause and understand that look. Amidst the ultimate humiliation, his gaze contained not a single spark of anger, resentment, or reproach. It was not a look of punishment. It was infinitely deep and sad, containing a vast ocean of mercy and ultimate forgiveness. It was the heart-piercing look of someone who understood the ultimate fragility, cowardice, and weakness of the human fleshly ego. He looked at Peter not to condemn him, but to remind him that he still loved him even in his most pathetic failure. That compassionate and painful look was like an electric shock to his panic, making it unbearable for Peter, who staggered out into the dark night weeping in extreme bitterness and regret. The world condemned him. Religion insulted him. His most trusted students turned their backs and betrayed him. The last spark of hope in human kindness had vanished. Complete, absolute loneliness began to tighten around the Savior. It was not yet morning. The religious council could not hand him over to the Roman governor Pilate immediately to carry out the sentence of crucifixion. They needed a place to hold him, to hide him during the remaining dark hours of the long night. And here we enter the darkest, most somber, and most horrific part of that historic Thursday night, the silence of the Zion dungeon. For those who long to dig deep into the roots of truth and history, come with me underground to face the shocking archaeological evidence. Beneath the foundation of the current Church of St. Peter, archaeologists have excavated an underground dungeon complex consisting of several levels carved directly into the solid limestone of Mount Zion. The top level was where the guards gathered to gamble, warm themselves, and mock. The second level was for ordinary prisoners awaiting trial, but deepest, darkest at the very bottom of that detention system is a black hole. Archaeologists call it by a chilling name, the sacred pit. When you have the chance to step down and stand before the mouth of that pit, a chill will run down your spine, numbing all your senses. This is absolutely not a normal prison cell with iron bars, wooden doors, or a stone bed as you see in movies. It was originally an ancient water cistern that had dried up, converted by the Romans and the religious leaders into a place of the most horrific psychological torture. It is carved vertically deep into the bedrock. It is shaped exactly like a gourd or a giant inverted bottle. The mouth of the pit above is extremely narrow, with a diameter just large enough for a person to be lowered through, but the body and bottom below expand into a dark, damp cavern that is stifling to the point of suffocation. There are absolutely no stairs, not even rudimentary ones, to descend into this pit. The only entrance and the only exit is the round hole carved into the stone ceiling high above. Anyone thrown into this sacred pit understood the harsh reality they were completely severed from the world of the living. No light, no sound entering, no sufficient oxygen, and forever not even a thin sliver of hope. They had entered a living tomb before they actually died. How was a death row prisoner put into this bottle-shaped dungeon with no pathway? The answer reveals ultimate cruelty and inhumanity. The guards did not lead him down. They brutally used large, rough ropes looped under the armpits and tied tightly around the waist of Jesus, which was already bleeding from the scourging. And then from that black hole they lowered him, suspended, descending down to the bottom of the abyss, tens of meters deep. Close your eyes and imagine the feeling of being suspended, dangling in a void. You can hear the sound of the ropes rubbing against the stone mouth, making a dry, screeching sound. His battered body, crisscrossed with wounds, was rubbed and struck against the rough, sharp limestone walls as he was lowered into the bottom of the dungeon. Blood from the wounds seeped out again, marking the rock walls. Until his feet touched the cold, filthy mud floor, the ropes were immediately jerked back up. The giant stone slab of the hatch above was pulled across by the guards, slamming shut. A dry thumping sound echoed, shaking the ground. The last light from the flickering torch through the gap vanished forever. And in absolute darkness, a darkness so thick you could almost touch and crush it with your hands, rushed in to swallow the Son of God. A hair-raising silence enveloped the entire space. At this deep bottom, the air was thick with the smell of mold and death. The bone-chilling cold of the desert night seeped through the 1,000-year-old rocks, piercing directly into his marrow and bleeding flesh. But human cruelty did not stop at throwing him into the pit. Current archaeological evidence illuminates another horrific method of torture. Around the rock walls at the bottom of the pit, at the height of an adult one, can still find perfectly intact small holes drilled through the limestone with intent. Those are chain holes. Roman guards would never mercifully allow a prisoner to lie or sit on the muddy ground to rest. Through the hole in the ceiling, they lowered heavy iron chains, threading them through these stone holes, hooking them to his hands and shackling his feet, forcing him into a bizarre, immobile posture. With both hands pulled high, he was suspended, half standing, half sitting, straining to bear the weight of his own exhausted, battered body. He could not sleep. He could not move. Ultimate physical torture was entwined with the ultimate exhaustion of the nervous system. Every breath became incredibly arduous, rubbing open wounds on his back directly against the ice-cold stone wall. The greatest irony of theology lies in this very moment. He who had once boldly declared, "Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness," was now imprisoned in the deepest, thickest darkness of the human realm. He who is the bread of life was having to swallow the salty drops of his own tears and blood. The ultimate self-emptying, the ultimate pouring out of the Creator was taking place in the depths of Suens. No one was beside him, no word of comfort, not even a thin sliver of light from a crack, not a single sip of water to cool his dry, bleeding lips. The space was so still he could hear the sobbing beat of his own heart. Physical pain from the lashes could be endured by gritting his teeth. But the most horrific torture, the most horrifying crushing weight in this somber dungeon did not come from iron chains, but from a spiritual reality invisible to the naked eye. Ultimate solitude, a solitude that gnaws at and destroys the soul. At this very moment, the weight of the sins of all humanity from the time of Adam's fall until the very end of the history of the universe began to accumulate and pour onto his frail shoulders. Every lie, every lust, every murder, every pride, every filth of billions of people was pressing upon the absolutely pure soul of the innocent one. He was becoming the embodiment of sin to atone for us. And because he bore that filthy verdict of sin, he began to taste a horrific separation, a pain that tore through eternity from God the Father. The darkness of the punishment for sin had completely enveloped the light. The ultimate solitude of Christ beneath the ground of Zion was the shattering of the soul when rejected by the world, betrayed by friends, and cornered into the deathly wall by the justice of the universe. A brutal separation that the triune God had never tasted from before eternity. The darkness and gloom of this long night in the dungeon was not an accidental historical event. Nor was it because the Roman Empire was too powerful. Here on the edge of despair, we must step onto the prophetic bridge to witness the miraculous, shivering accuracy of the Bible, thousands of years before this dark night took place. Psalm 88 in the Old Testament was written with the tears of a prophet. It is dubbed by all theologians as the most tragic, most mournful, darkest, and most desperate poem in the entire 150 Psalms. It is a strange and terrifying exception. While all other psalms of lament start with agonizing suffering but always end with a spark of hope, a thanksgiving and trust in rescue, Psalm 88 has absolutely no way out. It is like a muffled cry from the underworld that sinks into hopeless silence. And tonight at the bottom of the Zion dungeon, that poem was no longer dry text on a parchment. It had become the pulse of a heart full of blood and tears, the very breath of Jesus. The prophecy rang out like sledgehammer blows, nailing into eternity. Listen to those blood-stained words. O Lord, my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am a man who has no strength, like one forsaken among the dead. You have put me in the depths of the pit, in the regions dark and deep. Your wrath lies heavy upon me. You have caused my companions to shun me. You have made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. My eye grows dim through sorrow. Do you see it? Every word of the psalm matches perfectly with the archaeological and theological reality of tonight. Not a single punctuation mark is out of place. He was thrown into a deep pit in the literal physical sense. The judgment wrath of God toward human sin was collapsing upon him. Every acquaintance from the crowds who once cheered to the soulmates had completely shunned and loathed him like a carrier of a disease. The stone on the mouth of the hatch was slammed shut. He was imprisoned with chains, completely unable to escape by himself. And the concluding verse of the psalm rings out like an invisible blade, severing every last string of human hope. Sinking into eternal slaughter, you have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. The supreme, eternally holy high priest of the new covenant was being imprisoned and judged by a corrupt, rotten high priest of the old covenant. The eternal light of the universe voluntarily imprisoned itself in a dark prison so that darkness would never again have the power to rule over humanity. Immortal life was pushed into the deep pit of death so that death would be completely destroyed. It was the ultimate pouring out of a great love that cannot be measured or explained by logic. He transformed himself into sin to exchange it for righteousness for us. I want you to pause for a breath. Right now, do not rush to find a way out of the cold of the dungeon. Let the darkness of the house of Caiaphas envelop your mind, touching the deepest, most vulnerable corners of your soul for one more moment. Across the dust of 2,000 years, tonight's event is not a dry history lecture for us to sit and hear, shed a few tears of pity and forget by the next morning. The dark dungeon at Mount Zion is a giant mirror reflecting with absolute accuracy the darkest corners, the most melancholy, deadlocked, and lonely pains in the life of each of us today. This voice, this message is piercing through space and time, aiming directly at your heart, calling your name specifically. Answer me with the ultimate honesty of your conscience. Shed all the strong, proud outer layers. Take off the mask of a fake smile you still wear every day. In your stormy journey as a human being, have you ever been thrown into such a deep, dark pit? Where is the Caiaphas dungeon of your own life? Have you ever had to experience that mournful, struggling state that theologians and philosophers often call the dark night of the soul? It is absolutely not a fleeting sadness on a rainy autumn afternoon. It is a deep, thick abyss of despair. It is those long, long nights when you toss and turn curled on your bed, tears soaking your pillow, feeling as if you are imprisoned in a narrow, suffocating space with no exit, solitary and orphaned amidst the thousands of people hurrying out there. It could be the dungeon of a persistent, invisible depression that weighs 1,000 tons. That malicious disease suffocates your chest, robbing you of all joy and living, all motivation. You wake up every morning seeing the world around you only as a thick, meaningless fog. You struggle, screaming for help from deep within your mind. But the world outside remains indifferent. No one listens, no one understands that mute scream. You are locked tight in your own sick brain, exactly like the prisoner whose hands are locked to the underwater rock of Caiaphas. Darkness becomes your only companion. It could be the dungeon of a cruel, painful betrayal that one human inflicts upon another. When the one you love most, whom you trusted with your very life, to whom you gave your entire youth to care for, is the very one who coldly let go of the rope, letting you free fall into the abyss of collapse. They stabbed a fatal knife into your back with deceit. You lie lonely at the bottom of the abyss, hearing their happy laughter with someone else right above your head. You feel the loneliness slap against the boundless sacrifice you exhausted yourself giving. That betrayal is as painful as the kiss of Judas, as cruel as Peter's oath-filled denial of the Lord. It could be the dungeon of social injustices reaching the very heavens. You are savagely slandered, stripped of honor, career, and everything you painstakingly built with blood and tears from scratch. Every effort to explain every piece of evidence of the truth is submerged and crushed by the aggressive storm of malicious worldly tongues. They spit in contempt at your self-respect. They convict you in virtual public courts full of prejudice. You are pushed to the bottom of the pit of public opinion, tongue vow, consigned to the dark corner of oblivion, stoned and avoided by acquaintances just like a carrier of a fatal contagious disease. Or sometimes that imprisonment takes the form of massive economic debts piled up without exit, tightening around your throat like iron chains. Or it is a medical death notice from the hand of a doctor uttering a cold apology, carrying the bone-chilling cold of death trudging toward you, imprisoning you in a white hospital room with the arduous ticking of a ventilator. In those suffocating and stifling dark nights of the soul, when every last string of hope is severed, you look up at the dark ceiling. You clasp your hands in prayer until your throat is hoarse, weeping until your two streams of tears run dry. But it seems your pleas only strike the cold stone walls and fall away like debris on the floor. It seems God has slammed the gates of heaven shut, refusing to hear your cries of lament. And then the lying voice of despair begins to creep in, whispering in your ear in the darkness. It brainwashes you into thinking you are a worthless person, a pathetic failure not worth living. It infects you with the idea that you have been permanently forsaken by this world, that God has forgotten you. He detests you, and this thick darkness will be your only friend for the rest of your tormented life. The devil wants you to believe the hatch has been locked tight and suicide is the only way out. But my friend who is full of wounds, O souls who are exhausted and groaning at the bottom of the dungeon of life, I beg you, right in this thick darkness, please stop all negative thoughts. Gently open the eyes of faith and look deep into the darkest corner of your life's dungeon. Look and see who is standing there. Through the silent night, do you recognize that silhouette? Jesus was there. He came there 2,000 years ago. He sat there before you. He has been waiting for you at the very bottom of all this pain. Human religion and worldly philosophies always arrogantly demand that you try to rise high, that you must put effort into self-improvement, climbing invisible moral ladders in hopes of touching a majestic God dwelling above far-off bright clouds. But the miraculous incense and great grace of Christ brings a shocking direction for all existence. The God we worship truly has never been and never will be a deity standing safely on the edge of the pit, crossing his arms and looking down at you with a look of cold, distant pity, only to order you to act on your own and crawl up. Absolutely not. His name is Emmanuel, which means God with us, because he loves you with a great love that cannot be explained or measured by human logic. He chose to strip himself of the radiant glory of the heavenly throne. He cast away the crown of the ruler of the universe, willing to be bound and insulted. He voluntarily fell into the very darkest, foulest, and coldest dungeon of human history. He understood to the very end the feeling of flesh being rubbed bloody against jagged bedrock. He tasted the full bitterness of betrayal, loneliness, and injustice. He entered the deepest part of every pit into which a weak human can fall. Why did he do something so great? It's hard to believe he went down to the very bottom of the deathly dungeon of Caiaphas to ensure an eternally solid truth for your soul, that whenever the cruel wheel of life crushes you and throws you into the abyss, whenever you free fall in boundless despair, then, before you reach the bottom of destruction, you will fall entirely into his blood-stained, nail-scarred arms. He does not use power to fish you out from a distance in a superficial way. He steps directly into your darkness. He sits beside you on that freezing stone floor. He wraps his holy, wound-filled arms around your trembling shoulders and whispers into your soul with absolute empathy, "Do not fear. You are not alone. I understand this pain to the very end. Cry, my child, for I have cried. Hurt, for I have hurt. I am here. I have already taken this punishment and these chains for you." Because Christ endured absolute isolation in that long, cold night, you and I never ever have to walk alone in any gloomy, dark night again. You are not forsaken by God, rather God is with you right in the heart of the storm. He allowed the iron chains of the High Priest Caiaphas to bind his body in order to shatter the invisible chains of depression, fear of the future, past sins, and the darkness that imprisons our minds. His powerful presence has transformed every filthy dungeon of life into a most sacred sanctuary where human despair and brokenness meet the miraculous grace of God. The night at the house of Caiaphas passed long and cruel and stifling. Human cruelty and deceit seemed to have achieved a resounding victory. The light of truth seemed to have been extinguished forever beneath the stone hatch. Peter's desperate tears falling in the cold yard seemed to have closed a tragic, bloody chapter of human history. The dark Friday carrying the shadow of the cross had covered Golgotha. But O souls immersed in the dark night, collapsing under the weight of adversity, stand up and stretch though your legs are still battered and bleeding. Use your hands to wipe away the bitter tears and look up. The laws of the universe and the laws of resurrection grace are immutable. The thicker and blacker the night, the more fiercely the storm roars, the more brilliant and dazzling the coming dawn will be. The imprisonment beneath Mount Zion was only a quiet stopping point to prepare the way for a great event that would shake the entire universe forever. The stone hatch of Caiaphas could not hold the Creator. The base deceit of the trial could not bury absolute truth. Iron chains cannot bind love. The darkness of the dungeon has completely failed, because only a few short days later the giant stone blocking the tomb was also rolled away as light as a feather. Jesus pierced the night, tore through every chain of death, and crushed the power of the underworld. He stepped out of the tomb with the dazzling light of the resurrection, gloriously blinding the eyes of every demonic force. The great light shone in the darkness, and the darkness can never ever extinguish that light. You may be imprisoned in a darkest dungeon of life at this very moment. The storm of depression, debt, or betrayal may be roaring, but in the name of the King who conquered the abyss of Zion, I want to declare to your soul a message of absolute liberation. Never give up hope. Do not end your own life. Do not let the darkness deceive you into thinking this is the end. Your current tragic circumstances are absolutely not your permanent destiny. Darkness is not a grave to bury you. Darkness is only a cocoon to prepare for the glorious transformation of a new life. Courageously reach out your weak, trembling hand. Your task is not to try to climb the slippery rock walls by your own strength. Your task is to grasp the firm, nail-scarred hand, reaching out from within the darkness of Him. Entrust completely the injustices, the burdens of debt, the injustices that reach the heavens, and even your ultimate lonely tears to the one who once tasted all of that to the very end. The sorrowful Thursday night came, darkness enveloped the dungeon, the suffering Friday brought death. But keep the fire of faith burning bright, for the glorious, brilliant Sunday morning is rushing toward us. The majestic light of the resurrection will shine into the deepest dark pits of your life. Every chain of depression, disease, and fear will be shattered into pieces. Miraculous healing, spiritual freedom, and eternal abundant life will overflow, filling your heart. One day, very soon, when the dawn of grace shines, you will stand on the mountaintop looking down at today's deep, dark pit. Not with eyes of bitter hatred, but with a choked-up gratitude. Because it was there at the bottom of that cold dungeon when you lost every worldly support that you truly found the eternal light of your life. Listen, the sound of the imprisoning iron chains has fallen with a clang. The hatch has been flung open by the power of the resurrection. The morning of triumph has dawned in the sky. Do not sit back despondently in that dark corner anymore. Step out strongly, step out from the dungeon of your life. O victors with Christ, the darkness has completely passed. The eternal dawn is joyfully calling your name. It is finished in eternal glory.